Hello, welcome back to my YouTube channel. This is Wes Bellman, and today we're going to go through a hunt of APT 29. APT 29 is a well-known Russian advanced persistent threat, which is known for the SolarWinds attack amongst other attacks. So we're going to begin. So before we get started, I just want to reference Valentina Palacin's book, Practical Threat Intelligence and Data-Driven Threat Hunting. If you want to learn more about threat hunting and this scenario, then definitely check out her book. She gives a lot more detail about how to set up the lab environment, where to get the data, how to actually draw conclusions from threat intelligence, and how to provide, after you perform threat hunting, how to provide intelligence back to the community. Her book is really good. It's a very great guide from the ground up. So I highly recommend you check that out if you're new to threat hunting and this video interests you. There's a lot more detail there than what I can cover here. So for those familiar with threat hunting, you have to start with a hypothesis. So we're just going to jump right into it with the hypothesis. So your hypothesis comes from some sort of threat intel source. We're not going to discuss how you would receive that threat intel in this video, but we will in a future video. But right now, I'm just going to assume that we know that this APT, that one of their TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures, is to gain access via an SCR file. SCR is a screensaver file for Windows machines, and that file creates a process. And then after it creates a process, that process reaches out to the internet. The APT then proceeds to bypass user access control, or UAC, conceal their activity, and establish persistence. We'll cover exactly how to search for those specific activities. However, this is our hypothesis. So this is just assumed. These hypotheses we can either validate or invalidate. So in order to validate or invalidate a hypothesis, you need some sort of a data source from your machines. So we're assuming that this is a Windows environment, that we've collected logs from one or several Windows machines, and that we have access to those Sysmon logs from those Windows machines. So in this demonstration, we'll be using a lot of concepts from Sysmon logs. So if you're not familiar with Sysmon logs, I'll do my best to explain what the different keys are in those logs. There are 4 keys here that are we're going to use several times. Event ID. So every time that a Sysmon log is generated, it's associated with a specific event, whether that's process creation, DNS query, etc. Image, so in cases in which the log is generated by a file, the name of that file is its image. A process GUID, so that's just a label or a key for that specific process. And then the parent process GUID, so if that process was spawned by a previous process, then you can figure out what that previous process's GUID is as well. We'll be using those bottom 2 a lot to just track what a specific process is doing, and then if that process spawns another process, and then what that does. So that way we're able to track what this specific threat actor APT29 is doing from process to process as they spawn new processes and execute new activities. So let's take a look at the different tools that I'll be using to conduct and record this threat hunt. So the actual threat hunt itself will be taking place entirely here in Kibana. This Kibana interface is connected to an Elasticsearch cluster in which contains the Windows Sysmon logs, which I discussed earlier. I will record the hunt here in a Google Docs file. I'll record the requisite data so that I can refer back to the progress that I've made and continue to progress, and then also have notes for if I wanted to file a report after completing the threat hunt. Then I will also use Lucidchart here to track the process of the threat hunts. As I figure out something that a specific process does, and as a process spawns a new process, I will make boxes for those processes and then connect them through arrows, just so that I can see the full life cycle of what APT29 is doing. Also here in this Google Doc, I have a reference of the Sysmon event IDs. This will just help me remember which IDs are associated with which types of events. This is just very helpful unless you have these memorized, you know them off the top of your head. It's just helpful to have these types of references available when you conduct your threat hunts. And since we're going through largely Sysmon logs or solely Sysmon logs, this will be very useful to have. So this is the the first 20 or so event IDs. And then I also made sure to include this one, 7045. This is a higher event ID, which is a new service installed in the system. It's a bit of cheating and a bit of foreshadowing that, obviously this event ID would be needed. Obviously, if you have access to the internet, then that's helpful because you can just Google these things as needed. If you're in an environment in which you don't have access to the internet while conducting your threat hunt, then you'll need to make sure that you have as much reference material as possible when conducting your threat hunt. So let us begin. Let's go back to Kibana, and we are going to conduct our threat hunt in the Discover tab. So the Discover tab is where you can search through all of your logs. So before we start to validate our first hypothesis, let's just take a look at what we have here. So you can see that I have filtered the data to be between May 1st, 2020 at 8:50 p.m. to May 1st, 2020 at 9:30 p.m. These dates are relatively arbitrary. They're tailored to the specific data set. This is when all the data within this data set falls within this time range. You could search all the data that you have, so you could just make this all time if you want, but generally you would want to limit your searches to a specific time interval in which you think that this attack is likely to have occurred. Your threat intelligence can help you with that if it gives you an idea of when this adversary was executing this specific campaign. And that just helps with noise, because the more data you search through, the more data that is going to appear in front of you, and the more that you have to try to figure out which data is useful and which data is just noise or just regular activity. In this case, I have almost 200,000 logs that I'm going to be searching through. In a real environment, you would have a lot more. Since this is a test data set, the noise will be relatively low, which is helpful for this demonstration. Let us begin. So if you recall, our very first hypothesis was that an SCR file created a process. The way to test that hypothesis is to search for an SCR file. So if you recall correctly, a file is found through image. So we'll search image. So if we don't know what the name of the SCR file is, we just know some sort of SCR file. So I'm going to put splat as my wildcard.scr, and then so these both have to be true. Event ID. So we can just for good sake of practice, we'll refer back to our key here. So we see, okay, process creation is event ID 1. So that's easy. So event ID is 1. And now we will search. All right, we have 1 hit. So this hypothesis has been validated. Okay, so now we see we have a process GUID here. So we are going to definitely save that. And all right, this is our first process of interest. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, these process GUIDs are very long. So I'm going to create a process GUID. And I'm going to put that there, but this is too long. I don't want to record as this. So I'm just going to take these 4 digits right here. I'm going to use this as the key for now. If there are overlaps, then we'll have this here just to verify, to make sure that everything is matching, that we're not mapping this to 2 different keys. So in the real world, you would definitely have to be careful of that, because you have a lot more processes. Fortunately, in this only 200,000 log environment, it's less likely to happen, but in the real world, you're going to have a lot of these repeats as far as like these 4 digits. So definitely have to be careful of that. That is our first process. So now I'm going to put a box here. I'm going to label it with this, A903. And then what I like to do, this is kind of my style when I use Lucidchart, is to add a little note to each process. And then I can just say SCR file started a process. Actually, we could even see the name of that SCR file here. Image, so very strange name, right? So we could even add that here if we wanted. All right, so we have some notes there. That is the first step. So first process, we're going to call A903. That is where the SCR file started the process. Great. The next part of hypothesis was that this process reached out to the internet. So let us go one more time through our Sysmon reference here, and let's look for event types which show reaching out to the internet. So we've got network connection, number 3. And if we keep going down, we see down here, number 22, DNS query. So a DNS query and a network connection, 3 and 22. So let us search for, all right, let's actually take the process ID from here. Let's search for logs in which process GUID, this, and is 3, or event ID is 22. Great. So if you're not familiar with the syntax, we're just making sure that the process ID is the same as this one. So it is, so we're saying like this process itself reached out to the internet, and that it's either 3 or it's going to be 22. So either there's a DNS query or network query. So let us search for that. All right, and we've got 3 hits. We can expand this to see all of the different fields, but that can be a little bit annoying to have to do that with every single one. If we just want to see the fields here in this table, then what we have to do is hit add at the field that we want to see. So the field that I want to see right now is the event ID. So I just scroll down here, I go to event ID and I hit add. The only issue now is that source data is gone. So we can still click here and see everything, but it's gone from sort of the summary here. So here we see a network connection and 2 DNS queries. So this shows that this process did in fact reach out to the internet. We could consider the time, right, 2056:02. And then if we go back to our previous query, then we see 2055:57 versus 2056:02. So it's about 5 seconds later, but the truth is that the P in advanced persistence threat is persistent. So really this could lay dormant for longer rather than just kind of jumping within 5 seconds. But in this case, it shows that they reach out to the internet 5 seconds after creating a process. We're not going to add any additional process since we're just looking at that same process, but we will say, start a process, file name that, and then reached out to internet, 1 network connection. Again, just a way of tracking what this process is doing. So now what we're going to do is something that we're going to do a lot throughout this threat hunt, and that is what is called process breadcrumbs. So process breadcrumbs are when you track the child processes of a specific process in order to see what those child processes are doing. And this is a way of tracking an attacker to see how they spawn a new process to do additional malicious activity. So while it might be easier for us if an attacker did everything within one process, because then we could just track it all, attackers are a bit smarter than that. They spawn new processes, and then they do additional malicious activity from those processes. Fortunately for us, with Sysmon, there is a way to see those child processes. So in order to do that, you just take, so in this case, we have this process, which we've been working with, right? This is our SCR process, which reached out to the internet. So we validated those hypotheses. So now time to see what else this process has done. So we replace process GUID with parent process GUID, and hit update. Okay. So we see that this process generated 4 child processes. Each of them have an event ID of 1 for process creation. When you look at these processes, generally you have to know a little bit more about what these different processes are and how these logs work. So in this case, there's a little bit of context here, which again might just require research or background information. But in this case, it's that conhost is required for a command.exe to run. So really this conhost and these commands are tied together. So we're just going to focus on the cmd.exe files. So we're going to take these two process GUIDs for the CMD and we're going to add them to our key. Call this one AB03 and this one as well. Call B003. 003. All right, we've done our first breadcrumb search, and so we can add that to here as well. So we can create two new processes. And that. And then we can add arrows. Here, so we know that these diagrams are just really helpful for visualizing things. It can be a little bit tedious sometimes, B03 and B003, but this is just helpful for visualizing. Okay, we know that this this process spawned these two processes, right? So that's very helpful. We can look a little more into what this process has done. So this is not particularly useful. It's kind of running command.exe. So what we're gonna want to do here is see, rather than just see these processes, is to look at their parent processes. So we're just going to continue down this breadcrumb trail and update this. Here we have one hit. So that command.exe opens up a PowerShell. So now that is useful right there. So let us track this. So PowerShell, I'm sure most viewers are aware, is very often used by attackers to run different commands on your system, because it's just one of the easiest way for them to start automating their different attacks and hunting around in your system for potential weaknesses or things that they can search for, or ways that they can escalate. So anytime that you can see that something that we've hypothesized to be malicious, in this case the SCR file, is opening PowerShell, that is gold right there. So AC03 PowerShell. So if you recall, that was the parent process was, this is a little bit of back and forth just to make sure everything was AB03, and that's why I keep notes here, just so that I don't have to do too much back and forth. So the AB03, too good to be true, opens the AC03. AC03. And I could definitely add a note here. I could even add probably a box to show that these are command.exes. In this case, I'd definitely make sure to mark here. This is PowerShell.exe. So we've shown that we've opened a PowerShell exe with AC03. So let's go back. So we've got that one. Let's when you do breadcrumbs, you don't want to just follow one trail. You kind of want to track all the different trails that you have available. So in this case, we're going to take this one as well, this other cmd.exe, and we're going to put this in here. Update. Here we have 5 hits. So we have 2 PowerShell hits. That is, again, very interesting and important. And then the sdclt.exe. So if you're not familiar with this process, this is a backup process in Windows. And this is another example of when penetration testing helps with threat hunting. So for those people who've done penetration testing in Windows, you may know that this is a way to bypass UAC. If you remember, that was part of our hypothesis. So we're already starting to get into the next phase of the hypothesis, the following hypothesis. We will be searching more into this. But for now, we're just going to track these. So this will take a minute. I'll just skip this part where I copy these into my diagram, and I'll just jump right to the diagram. So this is my completed diagram. So you can see these 2 cmd.exe processes, and their child processes are diagrammed here. So the first one spawned a PowerShell.exe, and the second one spawned 2 PowerShell.exe processes and 3 SDCLT.exe processes. So we're no longer going to continue down this breadcrumbs and down this path. Instead, we're going to move on to the second part of the hypothesis. We have validated this part of the hypothesis. We've gotten the process GUID, which was an XCR file, and it started a process. We validated that it reached out to the internet, and then we tracked some of the activity that it did afterwards. Now we're going to look to see if anyone was trying to bypass user authentication UAC within the system. So let us do that. As I mentioned before, the SDCLT executable is one way in which an attacker can try to bypass UAC. So we are going to search for uses of that SDCLT. So we're going to make the image be again splat SDCLT.exe. And then we're only going to look for events in which were process creation. So we're going to look for process creation for the SDCLT. So we're going to look at event ID is 1. Okay, must have I have a typo here. So definitely watch for your typos, SDCLT.exe. Here we are, and we've got 3 hits, 203, 303, and 503. So not coincidentally, if you look back at our chart, we've already captured 203, 303, and 503. So these are the same log entries which we've already seen actually. The reason that one of the reasons we're doing this is you may actually start with a hypothesis, which your main hypothesis might start here. You might start with a hypothesis. Well, I'm going to look for people who are trying to bypass UAC. In which case you would get these 3 events. And then you could actually, if you wanted, you could actually backpedal to this and get this SCR file. In this case, we moved forward to here. So there's not really any new information here. This is just another way of looking at the problem, another hypothesis to start with. And we now know that this is the SDCLT. We're going to continue down the path of this hypothesis, though. So in order to do that, we will track the process breadcrumbs of these different processes. So we'll start with 203, and we will do the parents process GUID is this. Okay. So that one spawns no processes. So let's continue down here. Also no results. And let's just check the last one just to see. There we are. Control.exe. So for those who aren't aware, control.exe is for control panel. And again, if you're aware of this UAC bypass methodology, you'd probably know that the control panel and the backup service are used together to do this bypass. So this is continuing to look like this specific attack methodology. So we will definitely track this process. So again, just kind of keeping a key here, just to keep myself honest as far as any duplicates, and this will also just be useful for following reporting, so that if I want to use this in the future, I can just say key attached in the appendix, and then this can be in the appendix later, just so that I don't have to go back through and search for all of this. It's just better to keep good notes as you're actually doing it. So that one was spawned by, let me recall, by the 503 spawned this 603. Gotcha. So we will, and that is a control.exe. So what we will do is another process here. This is B603. This is a .exe, and it was spawned by the 503. So that shows the path there. So let us see if we can follow this another step. Let's see if this spawns anything interesting. This spawns a PowerShell, and like I mentioned before, PowerShell is always interesting. Well, before I copy that, let's actually look at the command. Okay, so this is interesting. This is a little bit challenging because you'd have to understand PowerShell commands. But what's very interesting here to me is that PowerShell is assigning a variable based on something within this PNG file. So it is pulling some data out of this PNG file and assigning that to a system variable. That is very strange. You wouldn't expect, a regular user to do that. And that is something that attackers do. They hide their data in images, and then they add that to a variable for later use. So that is definitely something that we need to dig into further. So how are we going to dig into that further? Well, first, let's grab this and take a note of it, just like we've been doing. Again, don't want to lose what we've learned here. So B803, remember that was spawned by 603. And then this is when you can kind of take advantage of the notes here. So not everybody likes these like putting notes in diagrams. Some people prefer to use diagrams for, okay, this is a very convoluted arrow. Let me start over. There we are, B803. So I can take advantage of the notes here. So I can, if you recall, this was a PowerShell.exe. And then I can just add an additional note. If you want to do this in Google Docs rather than here, then that's kind of personal preference. I kind of like to have it all here, but not everybody likes it that way. So it's PowerShell.exe creates variable from the PNG file. That's just suspicious that it's getting data from a PNG file. We'll keep track of that. So again, we want to dig into this a little further. Okay, so we've seen here that this process creates a variable from a PNG file. So if we want to look at this, this log again, right, we see that it does system drawing bitmap, and it creates a process. Well, let's see if there's any other processes or logs that we can find which have this behavior. So in order to do that, we're going to generate a search. So we're just going to see if anything contains this system drawing.bitmap. So this is a feature of Kibana and Elasticsearch should be aware of. So if you just type in this, don't make anything equal to, or don't put any colons. It'll just see if it's this will just search if it's somewhere in that document. And you put and then we'll put event ID is 1. Okay, so we have 5 hits here. Let's look at what the images are for these hits. Okay, so we've got 3 PowerShell hits, 1 csc.exe, and 1 conhost. Let's also look at what the parent process GUID is of these. Okay, now this is interesting. You have one of these is this is the file that we've looked at several times, right? But then that, so if we look at the process GUIDs, let's add that as well. Okay, great. So now we see this one, 803, actually spawns these next 4, which are also using that variable from that PNG file. So that is definitely of interest. So we can take down all of these as well. And well, now you can see we do have an example of a couple examples of double numbers here. So we'll have to take care of that. So we will, but first we'll just put this one in 903. Undo. Okay. This is BA03. We don't have anything with that yet. 03. Okay, and then you see here we have a 603, but this is different from the 603 that we already have. I can just paste it just so you can verify. See, it's 603, 603, but this one is E23D, and this one is E1, E3. So we will just we'll just put 2 in front of it, B603, and we'll do the same thing with the D803. Just put a 2 in front of it. Okay, so this one we've already tracked in our we've already tracked in our chart, but we will we'll need to add these. I'll just add them right now and then skip to the completed part. So this is the completed diagram. I actually made a mistake earlier, so I thought that this was B603 and this was B803. It turns out this was actually C603 and D803. So that won't be an issue as far as using those 4 values here to be the key. So that's helpful. So now we have a diagram of how we get from this SCR file over to these different uses of the PNG to create a variable and several different PowerShell processes. But we're not done with our hypotheses yet. So the next hypothesis was related to covering tracks. So we're going to look at how the adversary may have messed with keys. And as you can see here, the Sysmon ID for creating and deleting keys is 12. So we're going to look at a specific instance of creating and deleting keys. And since we've seen that the adversary is using a lot of PowerShell, we're going to assume that they're doing that in PowerShell. So we're going to see if they deleted any keys from PowerShell. So how do we search for that? So we start with the event ID is 12. So that's easy. And then we've got to do message. Let me make sure I'm getting this key correctly. Message, yes, capital M. Includes delete key. And then final piece is what they did from PowerShell. So image is going to be PowerShell. All right, let's see if they can find anything here. Okay, 4 hits. Okay, so we have 4 hits for this delete key using PowerShell. So we have the process here. We can see what the process is. So it's BC03. So do we, well, A1 F8 BC03. So do we already have that in our list here? Let's see. So we've got BC03, E1 F8 BC0. Yes. So we already have this process here. Let's see where it is in our chart. So PowerShell, you see, so this just says PowerShell. It doesn't really explain more what it is, but what it turns out this is doing is this is actually deletes registry keys. Okay, so if we take a look at, let's just take a look at one of these logs. Okay, what's interesting is you can see the target object. This is where it is going in, actually targeting that deletion. So that's interesting. Let's look at the target objects for all these different logs, just to see which objects are being targeted with these deletions from PowerShell. Something I'll just point out right now before we move on is, you notice this doesn't include any prior data about processes or anything. So again, you could start your threat hunt from a hypothesis like this. I just want to see if, if the adversary is going and trying to delete keys from PowerShell, or if anybody's going and deleting keys from PowerShell, I'm going to go investigate that. So your hypothesis where you start is subjective. It just kind of depends on what you think is the best place to start, depending on either your environment or just the threat intel that you have. Anyway, in this case, you can see that all the target objects are in the same path up to folder, and then it starts to add shell open command. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dig into the lowest level folder, syscommand, and then I'm going to see if anything, any other processes are touching this object. So any other processes have this target object. So I'm just going to copy that target object. I'm going to say target object. See, I've already tested this, so then run that. Okay, and I've got the process. This is the one that I just saw, but I've got 3 others, and this is for B103, E18B. Let's see if that's in there. E18B, B103. Yes, we already have that process as well, and that is here. So this PowerShell is also going after that same target folder. Are we able to see? So this is all PowerShells. We can see. We'll see what it's trying to do in here with the command. Are we able to see a command? I'm not seeing a command here, but registry object. So this is interesting. So you can see here it's creating a key, right? So we can see that the key is actually created. It's interesting by this process. So this is definitely interesting. We're definitely going to want to take this. So the key creates a key. And then this process down here deletes the key. So that's definitely showing that it's trying to cover its tracks from what was done up here. This is the value of logging, right? Is that they can try to cover their tracks with the files, but if the logs are forwarded quickly enough that the adversary can't get access to them, then you're able to see them trying to cover their tracks. So registry. So we're able to see what's done with this target object, creation of the key, some manipulations of the key, and then the actual deletion of the key. So that's very interesting, I think. And then we're able to again go back and see how it relates to activities that we've already seen. Okay, so now we've seen the adversary's initial access. Well, let's go back to our chart. Seen the adversary's initial access. We've seen how they've bypassed UAC with using variables from the PNG file. They've even done some obfuscation with that image file, which is very interesting. And then we have seen how they've tried to cover their tracks by deleting a registry key, which was created at the beginning of the access. So our final piece of the hypothesis that we need to test is persistence. So how do we think that the adversary might have maintained persistence? So or tried to maintain persistence. So this is a bit of a more complicated command, so I'm not going to type it out. But there are 2 folders in which startup processes are kept, and they both end here. They both end with Microsoft Windows Start Menu Program Startup, whether that's for the user or for the system overall. We have to double backslash this to escape the backslash, and we're still going to assume that the adversary did this from PowerShell. So we're going to see, did the adversary use PowerShell to try to do something to manipulate these startup programs? Well, let's see. Okay, we have 1 hit. That's always nice. and we can see there was a file created. Target file name was hostui.link. Okay, so it does look like somebody at some point in here tried to or successfully created a file which is in the startup program. So do we recognize this? Well, let's close the file. Do we recognize this process GUID 603 E23D? So we have a, yes, it's right here. So 603. So this one is something that it did from creating a variable in a PNG file. We didn't really know exactly what it was doing with that PowerShell. We didn't mark that, but it turns out this is actually maintains persistence through startup. That is what that process itself did. So that maintained persistence. So another way that we could look for the adversary trying to maintain persistence is to see if the adversary tried to create a service. So we're going to need to go back to our Sysmon key. And this is kind of the cheating event ID that I put in here. Again, you would need a good reference if you're in an offline environment. Otherwise, you can just try to use your resource available on the internet to figure out what these different events are. So a new service installed on the system, that's event ID 7045. So let's just see if any new services have been installed on this system during this time range. So event ID 7045. Okay, a Java service was installed on the system. This was the first one installed. Obviously, you can see there's different ones. There's PSC, XES, VC. Since these are all the same image path, I'm not going to say that doesn't make them interesting. A smart adversary might make sure that it's named something that would blend in. But we'll take the unique one, which is the first one here, and see if there's anything interesting here. So we're going to go back to see if anything was done with this using PowerShell. So we're just going to search for this, and then we're going to say image is PowerShell.exe. Okay, and we've got one hit here. This is a event ID of 11. So what is 11? Let's remind ourselves. A creation of a file. Okay, so this was the creation of this Java file, Java mtsup file. So yeah, target file name. You can see here, Java mtsup. Okay, very interesting. Do we recognize the process ID? So here is the process GUID. We've got 603 E23D. Let's see, E23D C603. So yes, so this same process here. So this process is doing a lot of bad that did the persistence through the startup file. Is actually the same one which created let's just say Java mtsup service. So that is very interesting, right? That this same process is doing all these different things. So that definitely, makes this one, go from suspicious to probably bad. So now now this is yet another log that we know is a value. In fact, one thing that might be interesting to do is just see everything that this kind of last process has done. So let's just say, I don't know if this is going to be too many entries. I might just have done a lot of things. Yeah, I did about 1,600 things. That's going to be too much to search through, but clearly, many of those things were related to things that this attacker was doing, including maintaining persistence. So we've really got our full process here. As you can see, we were able to connect these different dots starting from different hypotheses. And so let's just run through the different hypotheses that we had and recall like how we validated them. So the first hypothesis was related to initial access. So we hypothesized that an SCR file was used to start a process and it reached out to internet. That was all done with this process in particular. And we've got the file name here. We showed that it spawned two additional processes. I didn't notate what those processes are here, but if you recall, those were cmd.exe processes. This one started a PowerShell.exe process, which didn't come up again. So then we knew that the SDCLT process was used to bypass UAC. So we dug into that, and then that's how we showed that it started to pull data from the PNG file, and that it was using the common method to bypass UAC, which is using control panel, and the backup service, which is SDCLT. So we were able to confirm that hypothesis as well. Then we hypothesized that it was covering its tracks, specifically by deleting registry keys. So we found the process which deleted registry keys, and we even looked at the target of that registry key and found that when that key was created. So we showed that this process here created the registry key needed, and then also deleted it. And then finally, we found ourselves back into these PNG processes when we started to look at the hypothesis for persistence. And we found that this process here, in particular, C603, was establishing persistence by putting a file in the startup file such that a specific process would run at startup, and then also creating a service, a specific Java service. So really, you can see this whole life cycle of this attack all the way from this SCR file and how it all propagated all the way up into persistence here, the several steps. And this is just a nice way to track what you're doing and keep visualization, so you don't have to go through your logs later. So I hope this was interesting. You learned a little something about threat hunting. You learned how we can track APT 29 and see some of its different activities. Thank you very much.